Om Jnanatimidandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadama Yam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yutapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragnathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tushe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I slept with the fan on, so I've had a sore throat. Okay, admit all. A few people came in. Okay, well, Mrugank Prabhu's here, so I'll let him set up the screen share. But in the meantime, who can tell me, who can remember what we were covering last week? We were covering the first 11 or so texts of the 4th chapter. But who can somebody give me a rough overview of the content we went through? Oh, I'll admit somebody else. I will ask, okay, I'll start picking on people. Shri Mataji, what did we cover on last
Hare
week?
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So one thing that comes to mind is we looked at the 6 types of avatars, of the Lord. So the Leela avatars and all that. And just going through what we did. Also we looked at the knowledge of Krishna, how Arjuna is basically asking for an opportunity for Krishna to describe himself, because he is ultimately a devotee, even though he might be under the influence of Yogamaya, but he still is a devotee, and devotees do like hearing about the Lord. So.
Yes, very nice. And now Mrugank's put up the cheat sheet. But yes, no, thank you, Mataji. Those were some of the more important points. Now I do need to clarify something. I wanted to get through the list of avatars quickly, and I made one mistake, and those 2 things which weren't entirely clear. One mistake is I said I'm pretty sure I didn't go back and check the recording. I'm pretty sure I said that the manvantaras are Shakti-avesh, they're empowered, but to my knowledge, they're actually direct incarnations. And another thing I wanted to quickly clarify, I don't think I made it clear, is they're not the manus themselves. The manvantaras, they come alongside the manus. So they come within the era of the manus, but they're not directly the manus. If you check in Laghu Bhagavatamrita, you'll see the list. I forgot who the examples are that they normally give. But yeah, that was one thing that wasn't entirely so clear that I just wanted to clarify from last week. And the remaining one other thing, yeah, they come every manvantara, but they're not the manu themselves. So they come alongside that time, and they are Ishva Tattva. They are not Shakti-avesh. They're not empowered. They're direct. And then just one other thing that I just wanted to not clarify. I sort of brought it up, and then I didn't address it. In the Shakti-avesh avatar list, I talked about Krishna, directly Krishna. By that, I did not mean that directly Krishna is a category of Shakti-avesha avatars. Sometimes Prabhupada says something along those lines, but in general, we wouldn't say that. I still need to research exactly where Prabhupada got that sort of categorization for, because he sometimes lists certain individuals who are directly Krishna under the Shakti-avesha avatar list. That's something I haven't fully researched into. Maybe if somebody else has, they could they could flesh that out. But in general, Shakti-avesh means that they're jiva. So the reason why I brought up Krishna though was to say that sometimes the role of the Shakti-avesha avatar is directly fulfilled by Krishna. So one example is in this Kali Yuga. Traditionally, it is a Shakti-avesha avatar. It's a jiva who is empowered, who establishes the Sankirtan process in Kali Yuga. This Kali Yuga, we are very blessed to have had Krishna himself do it. So this would be an example of the Shakti-avesha avatar having their role performed by Krishna. Another famous example is Brahma, right? Brahma, when there's no jiva qualified to be Brahma, Krishna will do it directly, right? This would be another example of when a Shakti-avesha avatar has its role performed by Krishna. I did not want to imply that sometimes the Shakti-avesha avatars are directly Krishna, although again, Prabhupada seems to say it sometimes, but it's something I'm still waiting to do more research into to see exactly what Prabhupada's getting to there. So those are a few things just I wanted to clarify with that. But yeah, besides that, the general list was right. I think I rushed too quickly through it. Please remember, try to memorize that list. You don't really need to memorize what they all correlate to, but I think it's easier to actually remember them if you know what they mean, right? So yeah, okay. I think we had all of that. So I think we can get right back into the text now, if we're all comfortable with the content. So on what point did we leave off last week? We left off on the discussion of demigods, right? We were discussing why do people worship demigods? And why was this question coming up, right? Why was Arjuna wondering a question that can be answered with why the demigods are worshipped? Who can remember? It was the final point that we ended on last week.
So Krishna, basically, we worship Krishna because he purifies you. So he gives you what you want, but after he purifies you. So demigods won't purify you.
Exactly. And so therefore, if you want it quick and easy, then you're going to go with the demigod. You're not going to go with Krishna. Krishna makes you go through all of that trouble of having eternal happiness and all of that nonsense, right? All of those impurities. I want my pure karma kanda path. Don't make it impure with all of this bhakti, right? Sometimes we hear about karma mishra bhakti. This is bhakti mishra karma, right? When you do it, when you do it through Krishna, right? So no, don't ruin the purity of my material sense gratification by involving anything transcendental in it. Let me have my pure sense gratification, pure and pure, right? And all of you devotees, you've gone away from the pure path of sense gratification. I will strongly stick with single-minded focus on gratifying my senses, right? So when people think like this, they think, why would I have Krishna? Why would I have Krishna complicate a simple matter, right? Instead, I will go straight to the demigods and they will give me it quickly and they won't introduce any complications or imperfections, right? Because this is Arjuna's question. Arjuna is wondering, Krishna, you are saying this, and yet we see so many people, they don't go to you. If I can get anything I want reciprocated from Krishna, why would I go anywhere else? And that is the reason why. And therefore, Krishna, he says, people worship demigods, desiring success in their material work, the path of karma, and they get the results like attaining heaven quickly. So we see that this is there. So then we can go on to text 13. Now, text 13 will be one of our first sort of mentions of varnashram. I've used the word varnashram a lot, and I've sort of assumed you all know what it means. But here we're going to find some more direct mentions to it. We are not going to discuss varnashram and caste today, because in the later chapters, this comes up as a more predominant theme. And when it does, then we will. There's a lot of interesting things to be discussed. As I'm sure you're all aware, the contemporary understanding of caste is not the understanding we have in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And this is easier fleshed out in the later chapters. That's why I want to get to it then. But basically, we reject caste by birth, etc., etc. And we strongly do so. I still remember I was giving class once for some devotees in America. And I still don't understand why, but they were really swept up, I think, in some unbona fide ideas, right? They were very much influenced by some other groups. I'm not sure what those other groups would have been, because I was mentioning this point. And then this devotee, he kept on arguing back, and he kept on saying, no. Even though Shastra says it's not by birth, it actually is by birth. And so it's an interesting, I used to think the controversy was only that people would be upset that it was by birth, but now we also have people being upset that it's not by birth. So turns out I'm not going to please everyone. So we'll just have to go to what the Bhagavad-gītā says. But yeah, we'll get to all of that later on. I'm just flagging it so you don't think I'm avoiding the topic. It's just much easier to discuss in the chapters that focus more on it. So we have a lot of texts to really contextualize varnashram in. Nevertheless, we hear text 413. Maybe we can have Divyansh Prabhu. Would you like to say the translation after I say the Sanskrit?
Yeah, it's all good.
Chaturvarnyam maya srishtam gunakarma vibhagashaha tasya kartaram imam vidya kartaram avyayam.
According to the three modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the four divisions of human society are created by me. And although I am the creator of this system, you should know that I am yet the non-doer, being unchangeable. Hare Krishna.
Okay, Hare Krishna. Now, some of us who might be very switched on, and don't feel that you're not switched on if you don't get this, only some of you who are switched on might wonder something. Can anyone think of what the contradiction is here between what we've already heard before? Can anyone think of a contradiction or a tension with some of the philosophy that's already been mentioned by Krishna?
It's mentioned that we're not the doers, but
yes.
Krishna's saying that he's not the doer.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was looking for. Now, this is a little confusing, isn't it, right? Can Krishna please make up his mind, is what I've once heard one devotee say. First, we're not the doer. Now, Krishna's not the doer, right? Who's the doer then, right? So this can be a little bit confusing. It can be a little bit bewildering. So, but doesn't that say carried out by the, exactly. So what we'll find is but then on the other hand, we'll also find other things where Krishna describes himself as the doer of all, right? Krishna is in control of all. So we find three general, how do we put it? Three general suspects, that's the word I'm looking for. We find three general suspects that get presented, right, in the Bhagavad-gītā for how things are done. And sometimes different ones get stressed for different points, right? So Krishna, in this point, he's trying to stress the nature of his action, right? He's trying to stress the nature of his behavior, and therefore he has mentioned himself as the non-doer. Earlier on, he's trying to tell Arjuna, you are transcendental to this material body, you are transcendental to these material modes, therefore you are not the doer. But in certain ways and in certain senses, each one of these three factors, the material nature, Krishna, and Arjuna, are all in some way in charge of the whole free will debate. There is a tension between these three. And it can, again, be a little bit confusing if we forget that the Bhagavad-gītā was spoken to a person named Arjuna, right? Krishna is not abstractly speaking this knowledge. He is trying to make broader points with it, right? And in the same way that sometimes Srila Prabhupada seems to contradict himself, even though he really doesn't, because he's speaking to make different messages, Krishna does much the same. So we have these three, right? We have material nature, we have Krishna, and we have the individual spirit soul. So Krishna, the material nature, and the living entity, they all are the doers. Okay, I'll wait for Mrugank Prabhu if you want to draw like some sort of triangle with all three. We can have Krishna at the top, the material nature and the living entity on each section of the triangle. So this triangle, this represents, if you will, the nature of this. Each person is contributing somehow. How are they contributing? The living entity, he desires to do something with the material nature. Now, what does the material nature do when you desire to do something? Shivam Prabhu, when you want to eat, I don't know, a paneer pakora, what happens?
Like I try to go out and like find some way to get it.
Yes,
and then like make it.
And eventually you do have it, right? So the material nature, Maya is actually, we always say as devotees, oh, Maya is so strong, Maya is so terrible, but Maya is just doing what we want. we can stop blaming Mahamaya and start thinking about who's asking the questions, right? We don't like the answers Mahamaya is giving. Well, maybe we should stop asking the questions that get her to give those answers, right? So the material nature, it reciprocates the desire, right? So we can see now, to one degree, we can say the living entity is not the doer because it's the material nature that's doing everything. But why is the material nature doing everything? Because the living entity wants it to do it. So in that sense, the living entity is the doer. Are we seeing how this is a bit complex? It's more complex than straightforward. This person is not the doer, that person is not the doer, right? Okay, and now what does Krishna do? Can anything happen without Krishna's sanction? Nothing can happen. So the super soul sanctions it to happen. So Krishna facilitates it to happen, right? Krishna facilitates it by the fact that he sanctions the activities of the material world and he sanctions the jiva's ability to desire, right? So all of it is sanctioned by Krishna, right? All of it happens, right? Because of Krishna. Now, we might come to the next text and we might feel that there's something a little unfair about this, right? If this is the case, then, well, there's a few things to understand. Firstly, we must understand that Krishna, he works, right? Krishna does things. Krishna has activity and Krishna performs said activity. So how do we understand that Krishna is the non-doer, right? How can we understand that Krishna is unchangeable, right? What does being unchangeable have to do with this? All of this is actually rather complex philosophy, right? How do we understand that Krishna does his pastimes, right? How do we understand that Krishna is acting in reciprocation? And why is Krishna mentioning that he's unchangeable? As I've said, chapter 4, you could do a whole Bhakti-śāstrī on just the first half of chapter 4. And for your luck, we won't be doing that, right? But we could, because there's a lot of intense, dense philosophy that finds its way in the text. And this is addressed in the following text. Text number 14. Maybe we can have just Vant Prabhu. Would you like to read out the English after I recite the Sanskrit?
Yes, Prabhu.
Namam karmani limpanti name karma phale spriha iti mam yo bhijanati karma bhirna sabadhyate.
There is no work that affects me, nor do I aspire for the fruits of action. One who understands this truth about me also does not become entangled in the fruitive reactions of work.
Okay, I wanted to join these texts together as we discuss the final point before we now segue into the much faster, mind you, second half of the 4th chapter. Because these two things focus on the final point that I want to emphasize, and that is the nature of Krishna's activity. Because Krishna is unchanging. In the Western tradition, they call this immutability, right? He is not mutable. He can't be changed. He can't be affected. And so we have this tie into a few different features of what has been discussed. Firstly, we have immutability, Krishna's unchanging nature being reflected in text 13. I mean, in text 11. Ye yatha mam prapadyante tam tathaiva bhajamyaham, right? Krishna, he reciprocates to each person exactly how they are, right? Because it is described by our acharyas that if Krishna was to individually assess each case, he would be changing how he responds to each person, right? If Krishna was to look at a person and respond to one person well and to another person poorly, then Krishna would not be unchanging, right? Krishna would be changing based on each individual, right? This is the fairness, quote unquote, of the system. Or rather, this is how Krishna, because if Krishna were to change and he's God today, Krishna by definition is God, right? If Krishna changes, then he's no longer God, right? Because he's no longer Krishna, right? He's changed. So Krishna is unchangeable. And therefore, he is always the same. He is always reciprocating whatever mood the individual brings forward towards him. And that is why we have this whole idea that he is not the doer and he is unchangeable. Because ye yatham nam prapadyante. This way, Krishna, he never changes. He is always the same. He mirrors merely however one approaches him, right? However, Krishna is still nevertheless merciful. Krishna is still nevertheless having some mercy. And what is that mercy? Well, the mercy is that even those who want the least of things, right? Even those who just want sense gratification, he has established the 4 varnas, right? He has established varnashram. He has established religious life, right? In order that people may purify themselves in that performance, right? So Krishna is merciful. He is unchanging in that he is merciful, but he is also nevertheless unchanging, right? So therefore, we have the establishment of these 4 varnas that we are discussing in text 13. Does that make sense so far? But if someone wanted them, they get it. It's because Krishna gives it to them or because of the demigods. Okay, for that, we come back to the triangle, right? So Krishna doesn't give it to them. Well, it depends who they get it from, right? If they're trying to get it from Krishna, then pretty much what happens is they will eventually get it, but by the time they get it, they're purified enough to have some taste for devotion, right? If they've gone to the demigods for it, Krishna, he has sanctioned it, he has allowed it, but it's from him indirectly, if you can say, right? Because he's just sanctioned it, he hasn't directly given it. In that sense, then we can go to the triangle. Then because we consider the demigods part of material nature, right? Then it's being given by material nature, right? And even then, even if Krishna gives it, Krishna merely gives something through material nature, right? Dhruv Maharaj, he gets the throne, right? but he gets it through material nature, but then Krishna gives him so much more, right? Like this. So the pleasure that they get is still material pleasure, especially if they've gotten it through the demigods. Ultimately, the demigods have no authority apart from Krishna, right? So ultimately, it's all Krishna's sanction, but it's very indirect at that point, right? The process of sense gratification is about as far away as you can get from Krishna. But no matter how far you run, you can't get away from him, right? No matter how far you run, Krishna's there. Srila Prabhupada would say, even the atheist, because even the atheist eventually, when they die, they will face Krishna, right? Because death is merely the realization that I'm not the controller, right? I am not in control. So even death is eventually a surrender to Krishna. So even in that way, even the most staunch atheist, in some way, he will reciprocate with Krishna. He will, yeah. What has Srikanta Sena written? Krishna sanctions all this, but ultimately the people still worship demigods. Yeah. So yeah, pretty much what I said. Okay, let's keep going then. Does that clarify it, Alex? Or is there still a confusion?
That's good. That helps.
Yeah. So it's all ultimately Krishna, but yeah, that's why we have the triangle, to try and understand how doership in the material world works, right? And of course, then when that arrow changes to desiring to do with Krishna, then suddenly when the desires to do something starts pointing towards Krishna, then it's no longer dealing with material nature. And that's why which we will soon discuss, then it becomes akarma. That's why devotional service is technically referred to as inaction. Even though we're doing something, it's because we're no longer doing something in relation to the material nature. It's directly relating to the spiritual nature. But we'll get to that part later on. Okay, so we have that, right? Krishna, he is unchangeable, right? If Krishna was to award someone for the fruits of their work, he would be transformed, at least on some level, because he has reacted to what people have done, right? So it's actually philosophically relatively complex a point, right? If Krishna is responding to how people are acting materially, then he would be changing, and therefore he would not be the absolute truth. But Krishna is unchangeable. He is the absolute truth. You cannot change the absolute truth, and therefore he is unchanging. Even though he has created the system, he is not the one giving the results or the reactions. That is simply the system of karma acting out, right? The cause and effect of karma within that system. Again, nevertheless, Krishna is merciful, and the varnashram system at least acts to purify people, that they can be more favorable to spiritual understanding. Okay. So then we understand now, in really there are three doers, right? And depending on what point we want to make, we will stress the different doers. So then we have now that there is no work that affects Krishna, right? So he's making this point explicitly. There is no work that affects me. Again, I am unchangeable, nor do I aspire for the fruits of action. One who understands his truth about me also does not become entangled in the fruitive reactions of work. So now we are coming to segue slightly into the next section. Even though the next section begins in text 16, text 14 begins discussing the points which carry us into it, which is what? Understanding the nature of Krishna's activity. As I said, as we discussed the nature of Krishna's activities, we also discussed the fruits of it. Krishna, he is not affected by work, right? Because Krishna is not affected by material reality. Krishna is fully transcendental to it. Nevertheless, Krishna acts. This is what we must remember when we hear about Krishna's pastimes, because sometimes Krishna's pastimes sound absurd, right? And Prabhupada, he will make this point in the Bhagavatam, right? In Krishna book or in the Bhagavatam, I can't remember. There's descriptions of soldiers of armies, which are made of trillions of soldiers, right? We hear of Krishna having millions and trillions of cows, right? There's a famous pastime, one of Prabhupada's disciples, he got a geographical book of Vrindavan. And he said, oh, Srila Prabhupada, we hear We hear that Krishna, he sheltered all of the cows under Giriraj, under Mount Govardhan, right? But here I've got this map, and the dimensions of Govardhan are that I wouldn't be able to fit all the cows under Govardhan, right? They wouldn't be able to fit. Look, I did all the math and I got the average size of a cow, right? And I did the math and it wouldn't work. The amount of cows that are mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam, they wouldn't have been able to fit. And Srila Prabhupada said, you read too much. That was Prabhupada's response, right? Another point, somebody once asked a similar question. Srila Prabhupada, it takes us so long to get to Radhakund, and yet we hear that Krishna, every night he travels there so quickly. And Srila Prabhupada would say, oh, that is simple. When Krishna wants to go somewhere, all of the points, they are like the tips of a lotus flower, right? When the petals all close up, they become very close. And when they are open, they expand out, right? This is not how geography works for us. And it is not that Prabhupada is just coming up with an exception. In the purport, it is an option that you could say the Sanskrit is an exaggeration. That is something that some people have tried to say. But Prabhupada, he directly confronts this. And he says, in the pastimes of the Lord, anything is possible because the Lord is not bound by material nature, right? And he in fact takes the number, I forgot what the number is, it's something trillion soldiers. And he says, why not 1 trillion? For the Lord, he could have had 100 trillion if he wanted to. So Prabhupada, he increases the number even more. Because Prabhupada, he's making this point. It's not, again, some sort of fundamentalist fanaticism. Instead, he's trying to make the point that when Krishna has his pastimes, they are not bound by material nature. They are not bound by material nature at all. They're not bound by the rules of physics, right? Does anyone know the famous text in Bhagavad-gītā? Is there a moon for light in the spiritual world? Is there a sun? Is there any need for a sun or anything to illuminate the spiritual world? Who can tell me? Can anyone say? Does anyone know this text yet? It's a little later on in the Gita.
Is it Prabhava Matta Sarvam Mattas?
Yes, and what's the English?
I'm the light of all.
No, that's not exactly it. There's one later on where Krishna says that transcendental abode, right? It has no need for illumination. It doesn't, because it is all self-effulgent, right? So Krishna, he describes this. He says it is fully self-effulgent, right? And therefore there is no need for illumination. There is no need for a sun or for a moon or anything, right? And yet, what do we hear in Goloka Vrindavan? There is a moon, right? Why would there be a moon if there is no need for illumination? Yes, Mrugank Prabhu has it. Has the shlok. I was forgetting the Sanskrit. Most of the time I ask you guys questions to get you engaged, but sometimes I genuinely forget the sounds. I genuinely forget the point, the text. So why would there be a moon if there's no need for illumination? The answer is because Krishna needs something to dance under. The physics is very, very different when Krishna is acting out his pastimes. Sometimes we'll hear the animals speak and we think, oh, but they don't have the necessary vocal cords to do so. And that's correct. That's the whole point. Krishna's pastimes are not run by the law of physics. They are run by the law of love. Things happen in Krishna's pastimes because they are beautiful, not because they are natural, not because they happen by the laws of physics, right? But because they are instead transcendent reality, which is defined by beauty and love, right? A reality where all the water is nectar and every step is a dance and every word is a song, right? And then of course, the natural question that everyone always asks is, if the water is nectar, then how does nectar taste like? If every step is a dance, then what is dancing like? This is reality that is defined, again, not by physics, not by the rules of material nature, but instead by the rules of beauty and love, of infinite aesthetic rapture pouring out. And when it enters into our world, it's going to enter into it very differently than all other activity that we see. This is a very profound point that Krishna is making. Yes, I appear to act, but I act in a way completely different to action that we normally see. Does this make sense? Are there any questions regarding that? Okay, so as we keep on going, we hear this point. So Krishna, he's trying to clarify. People, they act in varnashram and everything. They act because they have desires, right? And I too have desires, but my desires are based on the internal energy, not on the external energy. So even though I'm here, I act aloof of the system. And therefore, I'm not in the system. And therefore, jivas do have a degree of free will, right? The analogy that's sometimes given is that Krishna is the architect of the system, but each individual jiva is the author of each story. Krishna, he has created the system, but each jiva tells their own story within the system. Krishna creates impartially the system, and each jiva reciprocates within the system. Okay. And then one who properly understands this, as I said, we are now coming to the end of the section of chapter 4, which is discussing bhakti directly, right? We are directly hearing a lot about bhakti. What do we hear? The person who understands this, what happens to them? Who can tell me? What happens to them is that they also do not become entangled in the fruit of reactions of work, right? So what happens is, if we go back to the, we don't need to go back right now, but if we go back to the triangle, right? As we understand it, currently, we are relating by having our desires being put towards material nature, and therefore we become entangled by it. But if we switch the direction of our desires towards Krishna, we no longer need to interact with the material world. And therefore, even though we are acting directly with Krishna, and we act on that same platform as him. When we act with Krishna, we are acting as part of those pastimes, right? In the perfected stage, obviously, right? And therefore, we are above material nature. Why? Because our activities, we are no longer acting in the game of material nature, right? We are no longer acting in the universe where the laws are defined by physics, but we too begin to act and perform action in the universe, or rather in the system where the laws are determined by love and by beauty. So in this way, we transcend material activity, the fruits of material action. Okay, so now we're coming to a conclusion of this very, very long discussion of the first half of chapter 4, but we're going to go quickly then throughout the remainder of the chapter so that we can finish chapter 4 today. So then we'll go on to text 15. Maybe we can have Vignaraj Prabhu. Would you like to read out the English after I say the Sanskrit?
Yes.
Evam gyatva kritam karma purvair api mumukshubhihi kuru karmaiva tasmatvam purvai purvataram kritam.
All the liberated souls in ancient times acted with this understanding of my transcendental nature. Therefore, you should perform your duty following in their footsteps.
Yes, Jai. So here we find this is a nice transition into the next section of the chapter, which is now discussing the nature of transcendental knowledge, the nature of transcendental knowledge in relation to, once again, activity, because we are discussing activity. As I said, the central theme of this chapter is transcendental knowledge, but it also, in very many ways, is activity. What is activity? Or rather, what is the transcendental knowledge of activity, right? This comes up a lot. Krishna has just described the transcendental knowledge of his activity, and now we're going to find the transcendental knowledge of the activity of the jivas. There's also a nice little circular reference all the liberated souls in ancient times. So we get a nice little reference right at the beginning, right? For the beginning text where we heard about all of the Imam Rajas, right? All of the Imam Raja Rishis, right? We heard about all of them, right? Vivaswan, Manu, Ikshvaku, all of them. So we have a nice little reference here. All the liberated souls in ancient times, they acted with this understanding of my transcendental nature. Therefore, you should perform your duty following in their footsteps. Now we transition into the next section. And this section is primarily a description of how do we understand karma on the platform of jnana, right? And so coming to that, we go to text 16. Maybe we could have Tarun Prabhu, would you like to read out the English after I've said the Sanskrit?
Yes, sir.
Kim karma karmeti kavayopyatra mohitaha tatte karma pravakshyami yajgyatva mokshyase subhat.
Even the intelligent are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction. Now I shall explain to you what action is, knowing which you shall be liberated from all misfortune.
Yes. So now we're going to hear about the three categories of activity. They are mentioned here. So we have karma, we have akarma, and we have vikarma. Also, just while Mrugank does that, one other analogy that's often given for why Krishna is impartial is sometimes Krishna is compared to the rain. And it's said that in our little triangle, all of the desires, right? All of the desires in the jivas are like different seeds in the field, right? And the material nature is the field, and Krishna is the rain. When Krishna rains on the field, right? All the different seeds come up, right? Into the material nature. When it rains, and we find the different crops come up in the fields, we don't blame the rain. We don't say that the rain caused all the different crops, do we, right? We say it's the seeds. But on the other hand, the seeds would never be able to fructify without the rain. In the same way, we find that's Krishna's relationship with free will, right? The free will are the seeds, and Krishna, he reigns all over the seeds. And whatever the seeds fructify as, they produce that fruit. And they produce that fruit, or rather that plant, into the field of material nature. Just because sometimes people struggle with the free will thing, I thought that's a very popular analogy. I think Baladeva Vidyabhushan, he uses it to help understand. Okay, we've got three categories of activity. Now, sometimes all of these three will be referred to under the category of karma. So karma is a little bit confusing. Sometimes karma refers specifically to karma here, and sometimes karma just refers to, well, it might refer to something completely different, or it might refer to all three. Okay, now let's do a bit more of a guessing game. Who can tell me what they think karma means? What does karma refer to?
Action.
Action, exactly. Karma is action. So, Mrugank Prabhu, do you want to write action under karma? What is vikarma? Who wants to guess what that is?
Forbidden action.
Yes, exactly. Forbidden action. Capricious work, yeah, that's forbidden action. Perfect. And then akarma is?
Neither action nor inaction. Like akarma means you kind of inaction. Like
Inaction, just inaction. Inaction is it. Inaction, right? So akarma means inaction. So we have these three categories. And so Krishna, he is saying the intricacies of this karma, they're very difficult to understand, right? Even the wise are bewildered. So that's a little jab at those who have taken to jnana prematurely, we can say. And so now Krishna, he will begin to discuss karma, akarma, and vikarma. And so these three categories are there. Now, karma, meaning action, in this sense, not in every sense, but in this sense, it refers to good actions, right? You're performing your yagyas, right? You're performing your sacrifices, you're performing your charity, you're doing good things, you're pious, right? Who wants to guess if that is what karma means? What does vikarma mean?
I mean, one which is not good. I mean, I would say one which is not according to Vedas or something like that.
Yeah, so we could say, I don't know, cheating on a test, or something more severe, right? Like you're eating some sort of meat, even though if you're not allowed to, right? So we know the Vedic literature is a little complex. Some people are allowed to, but if you're not allowed to, right? Or if you eat beef, right? That's always forbidden, right? Unlawful activities, right? Forbidden action, bad things, right? Hoarding money, that's another popular one, right? Hoarding money, very much vikarma, vikarma, vikarma. Just a slight query. The word forbidden assumes there's been express refusal or rejection of an action. Actually, it is those things. It includes those things that have not been expressively approved. Actually, it is those things that are not sanctioned, right? How do I put it? So yes and no. So I'm just reading out Srikanta Sena Prabhu's question. So yes, it does include, it can be characterized as that which is sanctioned and non-sanctioned, but that which is not sanctioned in general could be considered forbidden, right? Because if you understand like Vedic ethics, they're so broad that practically everything that you do is in some sense sanctioned. If you get what I mean, there's always a quote unquote Vedic way to do things. If you get what I mean, like everything is so while by the fact that something would go against what is sanctioned, that already makes it within the realm of being forbidden, if that makes sense. Yeah, but vikarma isn't that, oh, there hasn't been one specific Vedic injunction and I'm thinking rationally about the spirit of the Vedas and therefore I do something, and because I can't find an exact text, this is vikarma. Vikarma is that which acts contrary to the injunctions of the Vedic literature, and in that sense it's forbidden. Maybe not explicitly, but definitely implicitly, right? Like no, hoarding money, Prabhupada's pretty explicit, it's not allowed. Vikarma is that which is impious. I sometimes like the translations of piety and impiety because they sort of bring those things. Yeah, exactly, right? It doesn't mention crypto markets, so I'm gonna hoard Ethereum or something, right? Oh no, if I didn't, yeah, Ethereum or Bitcoin if you're an old person, right? Okay, so what about Bhakti coin? Bhakti coin is akarma, yes. It's all your chanting every day. There's your Bhakti coin mining. Okay, so we've got these two. Now, if we have these two, what is akarma? What is inaction? So inaction is a bad thing, isn't it? We shouldn't be doing inaction. Who can guess? There's actually three things that inaction can refer to. It can refer to being lazy, yes.
It doesn't bind to any material nature.
Yes, it doesn't bind to any material nature, right? So when we hear the word akarma, we actually have three potential definitions. One of them actually is what Mrugank Prabhu wrote, being lazy, right? The person who does nothing, right? The person who doesn't try to do anything. But what have we learned so far in the Bhagavad-gītā? What happens when you try to do nothing? What is the point that Krishna has made this chapter and the previous chapter and in chapter 2 he's indicated towards it? What happens when you try to do nothing? What happens to the person who just says, yep, nah, not doing anything? What happens to this person? The person who does nothing, exactly, senses take them for a run, right? As Srikanta Sena Prabhu has said. The senses take them for a run, so they end up doing vikarma. So even though technically it could refer to just being lazy, it's actually not possible, right? Genuinely being lazy and doing nothing is impossible. It always ends up in vikarma or karma if you're lucky, right? Because if you just lie down and do nothing, you still have to eat, right? You still have to drink, you still have to get things done. Even if you try to do the bare minimum, unless you're a Jain, right? And you're sitting down on a river just, or not on a river, I forgot the name of it. We all know how Jains, they perform that suicide by fasting. I mean, it's a bit controversial if you can call it suicide, but you all get what I mean, right? Unless you're planning on doing that, then akarma is very, very difficult to do. And even then they're breathing, right? And by breathing, they're engaging with so many different living entities, right? So unless you, in the next moment, hold your breath and don't eat and don't do anything for, a minute or so, or however long until you're out of action, right? Akarma is very, very impossible to do. So therefore, even though akarma can seem to refer to doing nothing, that just naturally ends up resulting in either one of the two, right? Yes, even the mind is still active in doing things, correct. I was still, exactly, Vignesh. That's the point that's exactly what the next text is referring to. There is action in inaction. And so the wise will see that there is always action in inaction. That's exactly it. So no matter what, there is no such thing as material inaction. So Krishna is sort of having a jab at Arjuna. Stop trying to think you can get out of getting things done, right? It's impossible. In fact, this is why dreams are so intense, it's said, because we accrue so much mental karma, because our thoughts are always running, right? Whatever we do, we've had to think thoughts before it, but not everything that we think we do, right? So naturally, just by that definition, there's going to be so many more thoughts than actions. And so because of that, we have lots of mental karma, much more than we have physical karma. And that's where a lot of our dreams come from. That's just all fun fact. It won't come up in your test or anything, but I found that interesting when I first learned that. Yeah, okay. So therefore, akarma does not refer to doing nothing. And actually, I think that's a good segue to what Vignesh Prabhu was referring to. Let's go to text 18 to better understand karma. Oh, I skipped text 17, sorry. Text 17 basically keeps on building on karma and vikarma. So let's skip text 17. We'll we'll go to text 18 and then we'll have our break. 5-minute break, you can all have a snack. Oh, is 17 merged with 18 in as it is? 1 second. No, I'm pretty sure it's separate.
I think my internet's dying. I don't know if you can hear me.
No, we can hear you. Okay, well, I will just read out the Sanskrit, and if hopefully you all still have your Gitas in front of you. Oh, no, it's coming back up. That's text 17, so we want to go to text 18. I'll just say text 18, and maybe we can have Katyayani Mataji. Would you like to read out the English after I've read out the Sanskrit?
Sure.
Karmanya karmaya yapyashed akarmanni chakarmaya sabuddhiman manushyeshu sayukta kritsna karma krit.
Translation. One who sees inaction in action and action in inaction is intelligent among men, and he is in the transcendental position, although engaged in all sorts of activities. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So this is a very famous text. It's very Zen-like, right? It's where is there action and inaction? Those are opposites. It's like saying he who can see the black in the white and the white in the black, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense. But I hope now that we've discussed a bit about akarma, we can understand it a little better, right? Text 18 is really just commenting on this. Text 18 is really just commenting upon this. It's trying to draw out, what does akarma mean? Because that is a hard one to understand. When Krishna says that even the wise are bewildered by this, the wise aren't particularly bewildered by karma and vikarma, right? It's when you throw akarma in there that things start getting confusing, right? And then therefore how karma and vikarma relate to akarma, this becomes, the question. So he who sees action and inaction is the one who sees the person doing nothing, but realizing they're doing a lot, right? And he who sees inaction and action, this now can refer to two potential things, right? We can say this refers to buddhi yoga, right? Which itself refers to either two things, right? Either this is nishkama karma yoga, right? Nishkama karma yoga, always slips me up. Either this is nishkama karma yoga, this is somebody transcendental, right, to material actions, or this is bhakti, right? Either one of these things. Why? Because they are moving, they are doing, right? And yet they are doing nothing. Why? Because if we can go to our triangle, V karma. Okay, I'll ask you to clarify that one in the question section because I don't exactly get it. But when we go to the triangle, right, we've no longer got engagement with material nature. So there is no longer piety, and impiety is related to collecting pious or impious credits, right? And none of those things apply anymore in material nature. So therefore, what do we see? On this platform, even though one acts when they're relating directly to Krishna, right? Even if one acts, they are not acting materially, and therefore there is inaction. There's inaction in action, right? Once, Srila Prabhupada once said that when we are singing in kirtan, we are all actually silent because no material sound is being made, right? When we one disciple of Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he was very popular. He had a PhD in history or something. He taught at a university, and he wrote a lot of articles for the Gauriya Math, back when the Gauriya Math existed. And his name, N.K. Sanyal, that was his name. I was bludging until I remembered his name. And he brought his brother once to one of the mutts, right? And he saw them all and he saw them do everything. And then as he was leaving, he told his brother, he said, well, I don't get why you're telling me to sign up for this. You guys do the same thing I do. I go home, I do some puja, I listen to music, I read some books, and I eat. That's all that you guys are doing. You guys are just focusing it all on one topic. But then his brother, he said, oh, when did you see us eat, right? And he said, oh, just then I had the meal with all of you, right? I had the nice meal. And then the brother said, oh, we did not eat. We were honoring Prasad, right? We were honoring the remnants of Krishna. This is what was happening. So in this way, there appears to be action, but it is not action in the way that we know it. It is action, actually, if we're referring to bhakti now, it is action on the platform that Krishna performs action, right? It is action again in the world where, in a world that is ruled by love, not by physics, right? That sort of action bleeds into our world. And on that platform, we are acting. We are acting on the platform of Leela, right? No longer on the platform of karma. What does Leela mean? What does Leela literally mean? Who can give me the literal definition of Leela? Can anyone say? Leela means to play, pastime, right? What does it mean to play? Playing is a celebration of joy, not a searching for it, right? This is what Leela is. And this is what inaction in action is, right? Because to work, action is to work towards having something. It is to work towards a happiness that we wish to have, right? It is to work towards satisfying an urge, right? An emptiness that we all feel. This is what action is. Karma, action, material action is asking the material nature, maybe I can try this time to help myself. Maybe I can try this time, right? And all of it always is empty. But Leela is the opposite, right? Karma is going from karma is going from action to find a solution, right? And Leela is going from the solution outwards into action. Because when one has that joy, they celebrate it in play, in laughter, in dance, and in song, which is why, again, Krishna is the absolute supreme personality of Godhead, right? Who can go on a vacation, right? Who goes on the vacation? Is it the person who's struggling, who doesn't have much, right? The person who's really, no, they don't go on vacation. It is the richest people who go on vacation and they play, right? To have a holiday is what happens when one is filled, right? When one has all that they need, then they can go and play. Then they can go on vacation, right? Then they can do all of these things, right? You need money, you need power, actually, in order to play, right? In order to truly play, you need power. And that's why Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead, right? Because he plays the most, and therefore he is the most powerful. And when we engage in inaction and action, that's what it is, right? It is this fulfillment of everything, right? It is a fulfillment of all these things, and therefore it is inaction, because it does nothing. It needs no reaction, because it is complete in of itself. Okay, so that's a lot of esoteric stuff. I hope that kind of made sense. If not, please bring it up after our 5-minute break. I'll see you all at 12 past, and then we will have those promised activities that I've been promising for a while. Okay, Hare Krishna. I will see you all, oh, not at 12 past. I'll see you all at 11 past. Okay, so now that we've discussed all of that, we might wonder, so this text here now, text 18, it establishes pretty much the flow of 19 to 24. As much as I'd love to go through all the purports of all of them, we do want to finish the Bhagavad-gītā, or maybe roughly, sometime this year. So Mrugank, if you can go to the texts only, we'll only look at the texts for 19 to 24. And basically what happens is in 19 to 24, we start hearing about the nature of the devotees who are acting, who are doing inaction and action, right? What are their qualities? How can we understand them, right? How can we recognize them? What are the qualities of them? And so this is essentially a huge list, right? I won't get Mrugank to write them all out because it's such a long list. Like he'll sprain his wrist. But just note it down that 19 to 24 is a long, long list of these qualities. But we'll speak about some general principles of them. So, Mrugank, okay, yeah. Okay, so firstly, we find, what is it? Let's have Srinivas Prabhu. Would you like to read out text 19?
Yes, Prabhuji. One is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification. He is said by sages to be a worker for them. The reactions of work have been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So there we have it. Okay, so now we're hearing, this is how the sages, right, have understood him. There's a key point here. Often I'll hear devotees, they'll say, oh, so-and-so is a Mahabhagavat, so-and-so is a pure devotee, and so-and-so. To make such considerations, you really do have to be a sage, right? So people will throw these things around often, but actually it says a lot. Actually, we should be a little timid in saying such things, right? Glorification is good, and especially on Vyas Pujas and stuff like that, we can go a bit hard. But we should also think that actually it's really difficult to understand these things, right? It's very difficult to understand these things in practice is what I mean, to recognize it. We can see the general symptoms, but we don't have full knowledge of it really until we're on that platform, right? So, yeah, we can see that the sages, right? So don't feel confused if it gets a little bewildering to notice these features. These features are really complex ones. Anyways, let's go into text 20. Maybe we could have Varun. Varun, Prabhu, are you there?
Prabhu Tarun or?
No, I said Varun, but we can have Tarun Prabhu because I think Varun is missing in action.
Okay. Abandoning all attachment to the results of his activities, ever satisfied and independent, he performs no fruitive action, although engaged in all kinds of undertakings.
Yes, very good. So there we find it again. Even without acting, he does nothing at all, right? This is the nature of him, right? He's doing nothing, right? Even though he is engaged in everything, right? He does all and yet seemingly also does nothing. This is not actually the description of the perfected person. This is a description of how he becomes perfected, right? So it takes 19 to 20 in many ways. They actually describe the process by which you can achieve the final form of texts 21 to 23, right? Because in 19, we hear that, that the fire of knowledge has burnt up all of his activities, right? So it's a description of the process, right? The fire of knowledge has burnt up all of his activities. And therefore, how is that fire of knowledge done so? Because he has given up attachment to the results of his activities. He is ever satisfied and independent. And although engaged in all things, he does nothing, right? And then in text 21 to 23, now we hear this long, long list of qualities. In my count, I get 13 qualities, but you might count differently, right? So what do we hear? I'm just going to shoot through these quickly. So, such a man of understanding, he acts with mind and intelligence perfectly controlled, right? So he's self-controlled, gives up all sense of proprietorship over his possessions and acts only for the bare necessities of life. Thus working, he is not affected by sinful reactions. He who is satisfied with gain, which comes of its own accord, who is free from duality and does not envy, who is steady both in success and failure, is never entangled, although performing actions. The work of a man who is unattached to the modes of material nature and who is fully situated in transcendental knowledge merges entirely into transcendence. A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to maintain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. Okay, so text 21 to 23, they're the ones mainly discussing the qualities. Now, this sounds very difficult, right? And it sounds very high. We must remember, people can almost ruin themselves by holding the goals of the Bhagavad-gītā to be the expectations of the Bhagavad-gītā. Texts 21 to 23 are not saying how one should act now, it is how one should aspire to be when they have gone deeper into their Krishna consciousness, okay? So often people will hear that and they'll try and think, you know, I have to be completely free of duality and envy. Yes, you should be, but don't worry if you're not, right? Krishna, it's about slowly getting there, step by step, right? This is the goal, right? This is the goal, not the method, okay? So ideally, this should be how you're acting, but it's not how one should act now necessarily, right? One should be going closer and closer to it. And what is the essence of that? The absolute essence of it is found in text 22, and it's found in dvandvatito, right? He is tolerant of dualities. This is the essential nature of the person who is acting in inaction. I mean, who is inactive in action, sorry. This is the essential nature of the person who is inactive in action, because though they move, they are beyond any dualities, good or bad, pious or impious. They act purely out of love, right? And generally speaking, those actions look good, right? Generally speaking, right? But sometimes they might even look bad, right? Srila Prabhupada was criticized. He broke some Vedic injunctions, right? In order to give Krishna consciousness, and in order to train people up in Krishna consciousness. But that is still loving, and therefore it is transcendentally good, right? Even though it is beyond material duality, right? Material duality provides order, but transcendental love, being beyond duality, almost gives a sort of chaotic good, right? A chaotic good, right? A chaotic love, because it goes beyond the dualities. Because when we go beyond dualities, there's no more the concern of me and my, and they and them, right? There's no more, here are us, the good guys. And it's always funny that it's always us who are the good guys and them who are the bad guys, right? Is the funny little coincidence, right? Whoever says us, they mean the good guys by us. Whenever they say them, they always mean the bad guys by them, right? All of that is transcended. This is the essence of it. Going beyond caring about piety and impiety, we care simply about Krishna, and therefore also all of the living entities who are simply sparks of Krishna, right? And we will discuss that a little bit more, how love of Krishna means love of everyone as well. So this is the essence of it. We are going beyond duality, because the moment you are beyond duality, everything else fades away, right? There is no they and them. There is no good people, bad people, right? There is nothing, right? This is not some impersonal beyond duality. This is a practical beyond duality. It's beyond the dualities of material existence, because spiritual existence, as I've said, is defined simply and purely by how can I serve you, right? This is spiritual reality, and there is no duality in that, right? So therefore, the essence of all of this, how can you have a sense of proprietorship when you do not feel me and mine, right? You think there is only Krishna's, right? You will only act for the bare necessities of life because you are already fully self-satisfied, right? In the non-dual nature of loving Krishna, right? It is non-dual, not in the sense that you become Krishna, but again, that you've transcended material dualities. And how can you incur any sins when you are acting completely separate from the platform of sin, right? I hope that makes sense. Transcending duality is the essence of this. Now, there's one thing that Krishna mentions in text 23, and then he establishes out in text 24, and that is he mentions yagya. Now, yagya comes up almost tangentially, you can say, in this chapter. He brings up yagya and he sort of wants to describe it. Because Krishna, he says, that person, he acts for the sake of yagya, right? But what is yagya, right? And that is a question that we find discussed really from 24 onto 33, I would say, right? So with this, we find that Krishna, he says in text 24, a person who is fully absorbed in Krishna, if we can open up text 24, we'll discuss this and then we'll go on to our activity. So in text 24, we'll find one word repeats a lot. Maybe we can have Shavina Mataji read the English after I've read out the Sanskrit. Brahmarpanam brahmahavir brahmagnau brahmanahutam brahmaiva tena gantavyam brahma karma samadhina.
A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consumption is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Jai. So we find the word Brahma, it's used here often. So Krishna here, he's trying to make the point, before he's discussed karma kanda or like these apparently pious activities and how they relate to spiritual knowledge. Now he's going deeper into it, right? He's talking about how, you see here, butter. The butter is spiritual, the spirit soul, right? The spiritual kingdom. There's all of this Brahma, Brahma, Brahma. Everything is defined by Brahman. So he's talking about how even these activities, they can be performed, right, in the spiritual consciousness, which makes them fully spiritual. So now before he was speaking almost pragmatically, how does karma yoga purify you? But now he's speaking about how it can directly relate to the attainment of transcendental spiritual knowledge. His Holiness Purnachandra Goswami, he says that when we understand this fully, we will understand that Krishna, he is telling Arjuna that, you know, the spoon they use to pour the oil into the fire, he said that that spoon for you is your bow, right? And the fire is this Kurukshetra field. And he does this whole analogy of how actually Arjuna, by his engagement in the battle, he is actually acting out a yajna. But anyways, we'll have our activity now. We'll split off into groups. We'll do 5 groups, I think. Towards 20. No, we'll do 4 groups. Yeah, we'll do 4 groups. And in each group, I want you to go over text 25 to 33, because, I mean, what am I saying? Text 25 to 29. Going over text 25 to 29, just draw out a table of all of the different types of yajnas that are mentioned and who they are done by, right? Just so you can process through this. Otherwise, if I read it out to you, you won't exactly process the information. Realistically, I'm not going to ask you to recite the whole list in the closed book exam, but I might ask for, like, give me 2 examples or something, right? I might ask something like that. So don't panic about memorizing each one, but just get familiar with the information so you can remember these examples that are given. What are the different types of yajnas? So Krishna, he's trying to diversify our understanding of yajna. Today, if you say yajna, you just think of, okay, yeah, get the fire out. You know, we'll throw, you know, swaha, 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 like that, right? So Krishna, he's diversifying our understanding of yajna here. So I'll split you into groups. Please scribe up a table of each one and see, yeah. I'll give you maybe until 11:32. Does that sound good? Or I think that should be enough time to do it. It's only text 25 to 29. So yeah, I'll create 4 groups systematically. Okay, I will see you all on the other side. Yep, I'll see you all in 5 minutes. So at 11:32, 11:33, I'll end the groups. So yeah, just draw up a table and have, what is the yajna? Who is it offered to? If it's offered to somebody, like who is the object of the yajna? What is offered? Just those sort of details. What is the yajna? Who performs it? Who is it performed to? / you know, what is offered in it? Okay, it's pretty straightforward, I hope. Draw up that table and I'll see you all in 5-6 minutes. Divyansh Prabhu, I think it's time to join your group. Pretty straightforward activity. I don't think it would have been too, I don't think, did anyone struggle? Was any particular confusions anyone had?
Text
okay.
27.
Text 21.
27, like, what are they talking about in text 27? Like, who is that referring to?
Oh, okay, yeah, so that's what I meant, like, it's sometimes not explicit in the text or it's in the purport. Text 27, text 27 refers to people following like Patanjali Ashtanga Yoga, stuff like that.
Like exercise yoga?
Pardon?
Like exercise sort of?
Like Ashtanga Yoga, you know what I mean? Like yoga studio yoga, right? Like, yeah. And they offer their life airs, the prana vayus. In Srimad Bhagavatam, you'll hear more description of the different types of airs. Like there's the 5 major ones, there's the 5 minor ones, and they all like control the way your body moves and stuff like that. But yeah, maybe a bit tangential. Yeah. Okay, so I'll quickly go through them, just because getting everyone to share, it'll be very similar content. It's not like the other activities where there's some variety, but I'll just go through them and each one of you double check it against the list you guys came up with. So text 25 discusses 2 different yajnas. It discusses demigod worship. It discusses demigod worship, and they are worshipped by offering them sacrifices. And it also includes Jnana yogis, right? And they offer sacrifices into the fire of Brahman, right? And so the Jnana yogi, they tend to offer their sacrifice of knowledge, right? So they're performing that into the fire of Brahman, because the supreme impersonal Brahman, it doesn't have a fire, right? So it's through their process of meditation, they're sacrificing their knowledge into the Brahman. So then 26, we have the, it's a very Prabhupada thing to say unadulterated brahmacharis, throwing shade on all of the adulterated brahmacharis. So we have the unadulterated brahmacharis, they sacrifice the hearing process and the senses in the fire of mental control. So that's the first one. And the second one is the regulated householders, again, more shade against the unregulated householders, sacrifice the objects of the senses in the fire of the senses. Interesting dynamic here. The brahmacharis sacrifice their senses themselves, whereas the grihastas sacrifice the objects of their senses. Just an interesting distinction, right? You can, in many ways, you can say that is the brahmacharis and grihastas are practically the same in Krishna consciousness. The primary difference is the grihasta sacrifices the objects of their senses, whereas the brahmachari sacrifices the senses themselves. Then text 27. Is the grihasta thing sense grat? Is what's being described sense gratification? No, what's being described is the curtailing of sense gratification, right? So what's being described is how the sense gratification, so the sense objects are, the senses are allowed to engage with the sense objects in grihasta life and married life, right? You're able to have, you know, you own a bit of money, you own your house, but you also have kids to take care of. You're allowed to have some small degree of sexual, you know, gratification, stuff like this, right? That's all allowed in grihasta life, right? So you have access to those objects, but the yagya is that you sacrifice those objects in the fire, right? You sacrifice the objects themselves, but you can access the objects. Whereas the brahmachari sacrifices the senses themselves. They're not even engaging in that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, it's describing the curtailing of sense gratification. So then text 27, we already described. Those who are interested in self-realization through control of the mind and senses, they offer the functions of all the senses and of the life breath as oblations into the fire of the controlled mind. So the controlled mind is what so they've controlled their mind, and therefore they're throwing all of the senses and the life breath into that, right? And what is it? This is Ashtanga yoga, right? This is the yogis. Yeah, these are the yogis who are practicing the eightfold path of mysticism. Then in text 28, we have again 2 or 3 or 4. Let me count. 4, yeah. In my notes, I scratched the way I counted them. Yeah, we have 4 different vows, forms of sacrifices. These ones are just the sacrifices on their own. They don't imply who does them. So we have the sacrifice of, in 28, we have the sacrifice of one's possessions, right? We have those who do it through austerity. We have those, again, we find the yoga yagya. Ashtanga yoga comes up again. Ashtanga yoga is the most popular. It'll come up again and again throughout these texts, but it appears again. Or we have those who do it through svadhyaya jnana yagya, which is a word you'll hear often in Sanskrit for like Shastric study places, right? And this is, of course, the study of the Vedas in transcendental knowledge. And then finally in text 29, we have pranayama, which is really just another section really of Ashtanga yoga. I was mentioning to one group, you can find the whole process of yoga listed out in these texts, but for the sake of time, we won't touch on it. Maybe later on someday, I'll show you all how the Ashtanga yoga process is referenced throughout the whole thing. But all, you know, niyama, yama, samyama, samadhi, all of these sort of different aspects of yoga, they're all mentioned in these texts. Okay, now having understood all of these different things, all of these ways through which jnana is attained through yagya, right? diversifying our understanding of what yajna is, now we can come to text 30. Text 30 is that, do you want to get the Sanskrit up? Mrugank Prabhu. Sarvepyete yagya vido yagya kshapitta kalmashaha yagya shishtamrita bhujo yanti brahma sanatanam. Maybe we can, I know we asked before. Mrunal Mataji, would you like to read out the English?
Sure. All these performers who know the meaning of sacrifice become cleansed of sinful reactions, and having tasted the nectar of the results of sacrifices, they advance towards the supreme eternal atmosphere. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. I think that's pretty straightforward. Let's go to the next text. Nayam lokostya yagyasya kutonya kuru sattama. O best of the Kuru dynasty, without sacrifice, one can never live happily on this planet or in this life. What then of the next? I bet you all wish this was in your shloka memorization, but no, it's not one of the ones you have to learn. Okay, let's go to the next one. I think these ones are obviously very deep, but pretty straightforward in terms of the flow. Now then we come to text 33, which is really the conclusion now of this whole tangent, if you will. Krishna's kind of tangented about yajnas in his discussion of transcendental knowledge, action and inaction, so on and so forth. So now Krishna, he's saying, Evam bahu vidha yagya vitata brahmano mukhe karmajan vidhitan tan sarvan evam gyatva vimokshase. And then let's have Vidhi Mataji, would you like to read out the English?
Sure, Prabhu. All these different types of sacrifices are approved by the Vedas, and all of them are born of different types of work. Knowing them as such, you will become liberated.
Jai, very nice. So here we find Krishna now, he is concluding this point that he's coming to, right? The sacrifice performed in knowledge, which is, wait 1 second. This is text 32. Sorry. Then let's go on to text 33. Sorry, I was thinking of text 33. So what do we find? But then actually mentioning text 32, there is actually no, we'll go straight to text 33. Shreyan dravya mayad yagyaj jnana yagya parantapa sarvam karma khilam partha jnane parisamapyate. And let's have Alex. Would you like to read out the English here?
O chastiser of the enemy, the sacrifice performed in knowledge is better than the mere sacrifice of material possessions. After all, O son of Pratha, all sacrifices of work culminate in transcendental knowledge.
Okay, so here we find, thank you, here we find the principle that's being mentioned. Why are all of these yagyas being mentioned? What is the purpose of all of yagya? Jnana yagya, right? Sacrifice in knowledge is superior to what? It is superior to the sacrifice of dravya mayat, of material possessions. So ultimately, work is about wisdom, right? What Krishna is saying, all these yagyas are here, and all of them are there in order to cultivate knowledge. If you're not doing it for that, then you've missed the point. Our acharyas have said that it's a bit like rice, right? There's the husk around the rice, and then there's the rice grain on the inside. Karma is like the husk around the grain, and jnana is like the rice grain on the inside, right? All of this is there. So to grow into knowledge, this is the point of all of this, right? Ultimately, all work is about cultivating wisdom. So therefore, jnana yagya is supreme over that sacrifice of the material objects. Why is this? Because the sacrifice of one's attachment is higher than sacrificing the object of one's attachments. Does this make sense? When we make sacrifices of knowledge, we do not just sacrifice what we are attached to, but we sacrifice the attachment itself. We cut to the cause, and sacrificing the attachment itself is much, much harder, right?
Prabhu, what sacrifice
yes?
of knowledge mean? Like sacrificing, like dravya sacrifice is like giving away money, giving away, anything that sort of material.
Yes.
But giving away knowledge, you're not really giving away. Like it is still with you. In fact, your knowledge increase in some way.
So that's a very good point, and that's the point that's being get at. The jnana yagya is the sacrifice of the attachment itself, right? So karma yagya, or rather dravya, when we're giving away material things, we're giving away the things we're attached to. But jnana yagya is when we use that knowledge that we are growing in order to abandon the attachments themselves. Does that make sense? Jnana does not, how do I put it? Gyan does not just mean knowledge itself, right? It also means the knowledge that is realized and understood. And when it is realized and understood, it is a yagya, because we are sacrificing away our false conceptions. We are sacrificing away our attachments to things. Does that make sense?
Prabhu, I still feel this. So let's say we give away what we possess.
Yeah.
And that possession in kind of like a valuable only because of jnana.
So the reason why, okay. So this is coming back to the yoga ladder, right? So the reason, so what Krishna is saying this should be done. These sacrifices should be done in knowledge, right? They shouldn't just be done. So remember at the beginning, we discussed in text 24, right? Brahma, 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 right? These sacrifices are done in knowledge, right? And because they are done in knowledge, they are done in a way that allows one to cultivate this understanding, right? So this knowledge comes in that sense. However, one can just do a sacrifice just of the objects, right? And doing that, one gets pious reactions, and they also begin to learn a little bit about detachment, right? And as that knowledge of detachment grows, then one will go up the yoga ladder, right? So what's being discussed here is these yagyas that are being done for jnana, right? Brahman, 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 right? So these ones are being done for that goal, and therefore they are superior, right? So that's what's being discussed here. This activity is being done as a direct means to get transcendental knowledge, right? Whereas otherwise, they would just be a sacrifice. They would just be a dravya yagya, right? They would just be a yagya of objects, right? And therefore, you will get some understanding because you're learning self-discipline, you're learning restraint because you're giving up the objects of your senses. But you're not actually. This is the whole point of this section, is to diversify our understanding of the word yagya, right? So we go deeper into that understanding of yagya by doing it in knowledge. And when we do it in knowledge, we will get knowledge in return. Does this make more sense?
Yes, Prabhuji.
But it's still a little difficult.
I think I may need to think over it more before I ask a meaningful question. I'm not able to ask.
I completely understand. Definitely think over it, and you can bring it up next week or even later on if it comes to your head. I would recommend read the purport to text 33. That will, or just read all of the purports for this whole section. I think that will help a lot. So reread them with this question in mind. Read from 24 to 33, with emphasis on 33 and 24. That's what I would do. I think that should help. If not, please, you'll definitely be able to ask the question at least after reading those purports.
Yes, I'll try, Prabhuji.
Yeah. Okay, so now we've heard all of this. What is the time? Okay, we'll discuss text 34 then, and then we'll have to finish chapter 4 next week, much to my chagrin. But that's all right, because the end of chapter 4 segues really well into chapter 5. It's a bit like how the end of chapter 3 goes immediately into chapter 4. The end of chapter 4 goes immediately into chapter 5. So maybe it's even better to do the very last few texts next week, so we can get the flow better. So all of this, yes. So it diversifies our understanding of what is what is yagya, And it does so with the point of showing how jnana directly relates to it, right? Krishna, he's very much confronting this conception that we have, right? Now, text 34, Krishna, he's sort of, I don't want to say he realizes he's gone on a tangent, but it's almost like he's realized he's gone on a tangent, and now he's going back to the central point, which was transcendental knowledge, right? And all of this is related to transcendental knowledge. He's talking about how yagya works in the attainment of transcendental knowledge. But now he's going back straight to the direct boom, boom, boom discussion, right? And this also ties into everything. Not only is it coming back to it, but Krishna, he's trying to make the point that all of these processes, you cannot learn how to do these yagyas without the guidance of a guru. Without the guidance of the guru, you cannot do any of this. So therefore, Krishna, he's coming to the central point. What does it mean to obtain transcendental knowledge? He's described this whole list of things that rightfully confuses us, right? We're all a bit confused. Oh, there's all of these things. What's going on here? And now Krishna says, how do we truly get knowledge, right? How do we truly get knowledge from any of these processes? How do we know which processes to use? And how do we maneuver all of these? And actually, how do we skip all of these processes? It's all there in text 34. Text 34 we will memorize, and we should all hold this as a sutra in our spiritual life. This is our spiritual life condensed into one shloka. If you just do this one shloka, you can go from the beginning to the end of Krishna consciousness perfectly. You don't need anything else. Text 34. This is the fullness, right? So Krishna here, actually, Mrugank, don't show on the screen, go back to the writing. I want to see, has anyone learned 34 yet in preparation for the shloka test?
Yes.
Yes, maybe we can hear then from you. Maybe one, you can choose among yourself. One can do the Sanskrit, one can try do the English.
Advidi pranipatena pariprasnena sevaya upidya dekshante jnanam jnanina tattvadarshinaha.
Jai. And the English, are you able to grasp the, like, no need to do it word for word, just a general meaning? If not, you can read. It's all right if you can't do it from memory.
Just try to learn the truth
By approaching a guru.
By approaching a guru.
Yes.
And performing the service. And
yes.
And because they have seen
they've
seen the truth. They've seen the truth. Yeah.
They will impart the knowledge.
They will impart the knowledge.
Jai. Very nice. Yeah, that's very good. It's always scary to do it. Not scary, but it's always harder to do it when other people are listening, right? So very, very good. I remember, this is a little tangent, but I remember when I was getting initiated, my Guru Maharaj, I was there in Guru Maharaj's room, and he looked at me because of my godbrother. He was saying, oh, this is at the time Tilak. This is Tilak Prabhu. Tilak Prabhu, he very much likes studying Shastra. And Guru Maharaj, he heard that. And then he asked me, he said, oh, if you like studying Shastra, then tell me one shlok from the Bhagavad-gītā. And I'll tell you, I forgot every single shlok I ever knew. Like I forgot the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Forget about Bhagavad-gītā shloks. I forgot everything. There's something just when you're expected to do it in front of other people, then yeah. So yeah, no, so that's all I'm saying is you didn't do that. You remembered it. So it's a very good, if you can do it at all in front of other people, then it's always an achievement. Okay, so this text is so central to understanding. And so Krishna, he's mentioning it, he's coming back to the point. The discussion of yagyas is done, right? Now he's coming. What is the point of this? How do we understand it through yagya, through any sacrifice? Because we are also doing a yagya. We are doing the Sankirtan yagya, right? How do we perform these yagyas, right? Which yagyas do we perform? All of these things is only understood through this text. Text 34 is the center of our spiritual life. Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprasnena sevaya. These are the guidelines of how we can perform our spiritual life. And this is the essence of it. So this is why Krishna, he's bringing it up. He's bringing clarity. So you said all of these things. How am I meant to do them? Which one am I meant to do? This is what you're meant to do. If you do this, you will receive transcendental knowledge. And what is that? Tad vidhi pranipatena, right? So approach pranipatena, that's where we get dandavat pranam prabhu, dandavat pranam, right? Pranipatena. You approach with respect, right? Not blind faith or anything, but we should be respectful, right? Arjuna, he has been very challenging to Krishna this whole time, right? He hasn't been giving Krishna an easy time. And we'll find in the next chapter, he's not going to give him an easy time again, right? He's going to keep it, but he keeps it respectful, right? He's respectful for the fact that Krishna has some understanding, right? But he's also going to say, I'm not going to blindly accept it either, right? This is, Arjuna models pranipatena for us, right? Give full respect, you know, give full respect, give everything. But this doesn't mean, sometimes people will mistake it and they'll have this false respect, you know? You'll have people sometimes say things really over the top and it's like, you don't actually mean it, right? I know I was nursing a Kavacha Prabhu, he was saying this. You see this in Vyas Puja offerings. People will say, Gurudev, my very life and soul is completely yours, right? And you'll say, how many people actually do that, you know? If their spiritual master asked them to give their life and soul, which obviously he probably won't, right? Would they actually give it? No, right? So, but ideally there is that aspect, obviously. That is something we go towards. But what I'm saying is that there shouldn't be falseness there, right? There shouldn't be these falsities, just saying words without meaning them. There should be that meaningful respect given, right? Not just that we say a few ritualized words, but that we meaningfully respect this individual, right? And of course, we express that respect through ritualized words. I'm not saying we shouldn't say Dandavat pranams and everything. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do them, but we should mean them as well, right? So pranipatena, with respect. But again, not a blind respect. Blind respect is just fake respect. Because if we had a true respect, we'd respect them enough to know that they will be able to answer our issues, right? That they won't just crack, right? So blind respect, blind faith is just the same as false respect, false faith, right? So then we have this. Okay, we're going to go like 4 or 5 minutes over time. I hope that doesn't cause issues for anyone. This will be, I think, the second time we've gone really over time. I give my full Vanchakalpa apologies, but I want to fully touch on this. Pariprashnena. Now there comes the questions. Questions are so important. Not just randomly asking questions, right? Not just asking inquiries for the sake of asking questions, right? Sometimes they can be fun. My favorite question ever, I won't say who it was, but there's somebody here, he asked, what is Brahma's last name? And that's one of my favorite questions. I love that question, that's a good one. But maybe those aren't the questions. Those are the questions we can say for friends, right? Maybe not for the spiritual master, unless we sincerely mean it, right? But sometimes just for trivia, maybe they're not the most important questions, but they're not bad questions, right? But yeah, you'll find all sorts of stuff. And you'll see people say all sorts of questions, you know, in this yuga, did this happen? And did this happen? Did this happen? And in one sense, they're fine if they guide your shastric study and everything. I don't think the question itself is bad, right? But before the spiritual master, we should really be asking substantial questions, right? We should be, and sincere questions. If it sincerely is a thing that you're wondering that has some real relevance, then you can even ask, what is Brahma's last name? I'm not saying that. But sometimes, you know, we'll have questions like that and it's just sort of like, oh, you know, I wonder, you know? That is not what's being referred to by pariprashna. And I bring that up because sometimes you see people ask questions for the sake of asking questions. Maybe a less humorous example, I once heard Kadamba Kanana Maharaj, who was giving this wonderful class. And every time he would quote a shloka or something from Shastra, this one Mataji, she would ask, what's the reference for that? What's the reference for that? Like, which shloka number is it? And you could tell she was just asking the question for the sake of asking the question, right? It wouldn't have changed her, it wouldn't have changed. All it happened is Kadamba Kanana Maharaj, his flow would get interrupted and he'd sort of have to sit and try to remember, right? Where exactly what the shloka number is. Sometimes that might be a sincere question. I'm giving these examples. All of these examples can be sincere and valuable at times, right? It might be it's a text you hear often and you think, well, where actually is that from, right? But to ask it on every single text, that doesn't mean anything substantial. She was asking questions for the sake of asking questions. This is not what we mean. What we mean is what Arjuna is doing. Krishna, what you're saying is making no sense to me. I'm having an existential crisis. Clear this up. Krishna, I cannot believe what you're saying, but I want to. Please explain what's happening, right? And of course, that can be expressed again in specific questions. I'm not saying that your question just has to be, you go out and you say, I'm having an existential crisis, answer it. The question can be something like, when I serve the deity, should I do this or should I do that, right? That's a very specific question, but it's a very valid one, right? It could also be, Gurudev, I'm hearing people use the shloka all the time. What is the reference for it, right? To use an example I gave as a bad example, that could also be a good example. If the devotee is wondering, is this a valid text? Is this a reasonable one, right? Yeah. So all that to say, pariprashna means that. It doesn't just mean asking any old question, and it doesn't just mean asking questions, right? For the sake of asking questions. It means asking sincere questions, heartfelt questions that are meaningful to one's spiritual life, which are the majority of questions people have, right? And again, it's not that you'll fail spiritual life if you have some trivial questions, right? I'm just saying those aren't the ones that are being referred to here as the key to progressing in spiritual life. And then lastly, of course, we have seva, right? Yeah, so as I said, we'll be going 10 minutes or so over time. So again, my full apologies. I really hate to do this, but seva, okay? So service. That's why I say when we do Bhakti-śāstrī, the best way you will learn is if you're doing some service, if you're chanting a bit, because Vedic knowledge is not something that is just academically learned. This is mentioned in the Shastras, and I'll bring this up again, so there's no need to write it down, but there's different steps to knowledge. There's Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasanam, and Nididhyasanam, right? There's Shravanam, there's the hearing, right? You hear the knowledge. Then there's Mananam, you meditate upon it. And then there's Nididhyasanam, you realize it. And this is realized through practically applying it into the world. And service is a really valid way by which we can obtain the realization practically in our lives of any knowledge. It is not simply enough to be respectful and then to ask the important questions. We must go out into the world and we must realize that knowledge. We do service both to obtain the mercy by which we can understand this knowledge, and then also to have the practical experience of this knowledge, because what is it that we are receiving? We are receiving knowledge of how to better serve people. This is what Krishna consciousness is. What does Srila Prabhupada say? Devotional service. When we understand Krishna consciousness, we are receiving knowledge and realization on how to serve better, right? Therefore, sevaya, right? By the rendering of service. By doing that by which we are being instructed to do, we enter into the full realization of it. And so this is the pedagogical model, right, that we have. So this is it. We should memorize this. We should keep this very much on the walls of our heart. This is the means by which we learn everything. We can think about this. If we have any question, we can go through these steps. Have we found somebody that we genuinely respect? And then we can express that respect too, right? Again, pranipatena is not just the institutional, this person is an approved sannyasi and therefore I will show them respect and they will answer my questions. I wish it would be that easy, but it's not, right? Is it a person I genuinely have the type of respect that I do, that this person can answer my question? I will approach with full respect. Have I done this, right? Okay, I've done this. Have I asked the question then, the sincere question that I have, right? I have. Have I heard the answer? Okay. Now have I done some service and dwelled on this, right? Have I tried to realize this answer? If all of this hasn't done, then you can rinse and repeat. And in my experience, at least, eventually you will come to a realization, to a solution, right? But this is a really good checklist in our mind to think as we go deeper and deeper into our Krishna consciousness. Okay, so there's that. There's one final point I want to make on this text. I'm just trying to think if I should push it a little longer. Look, I will. One final point, okay? This final point, and then I'll open up to questions. The homework, by the way, for next week is to start chapter 6, read the first 9 texts of chapter 6 and compare it to texts 25 to 29. See which elements of the first 9 texts of chapter 6 relate to 25 to 29. See how the Ashtanga Yoga relates to this section here. Just see if you can see any crossover, any relationship, right? We'll do that with all of the readings for chapter 6. Okay, you know what? I'll save the final point I had about text 34 for next week. It's about darshanaha. Are there any questions? Yes, Sri Mataji.
So it's not like specifically related to what we've covered today.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah.
Okay. Like, you know how we looked at Paramatma, like previously in chapter 2. So I was just wondering, like, I understand that Paramatma exists in the material world, right? So like when a person dies or leaves the body, Paramatma goes to the next body with the soul and subtle body. I was just wondering, but when a soul goes back to like Godhead, then like where does the Paramatma go? Because it's my understanding like Paramatma doesn't go outside of the material world.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so you're not really, so there's again, it's a good question, which means there's like 50 different things you need to discuss before you can answer it, right? On the one hand, we always need to keep in mind that Paramatma, while being in the material world, is still Krishna, right? He is still Krishna. That's the complex nature of avatars, right? Even though he's playing a different role and there's different qualities being manifested, he still is Krishna. So it's not necessarily that the Paramatma abandons them, but on the other hand, yeah, the Paramatma it wouldn't be necessarily present. Krishna is present in the heart of the devotee. So my understanding is because Krishna is directly present, at least that's my understanding, that so there won't be the direct presence of the Paramatma, but there is still presence of Krishna because Krishna is directly present. Does that make sense? I know there's one commentary somewhere that discusses this in relation to Hanuman opening his chest and Ramchandra's inside it. But for the love of me, I cannot remember what they said. I just remember that they comment on this slightly. So I know there's a better answer out there, but definitely because Krishna is present there in the heart directly of the devotee. There's always that. So yeah, but yeah, it's no longer Paramatma. It's Paramatma. It's like a presence in the material world, by definition. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. And just a couple of quick questions about like the closed book exam.
Oh yeah.
Just like with the exam, how are we gonna give it? Like, is it in person or like are we doing it handwriting, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So with the question is it's going to be in person because coronavirus, at least for now. I'm not gonna commit to anything because you never know what will happen. It'll be in person, so all of you will sit it in your respective temples. So I'll need to, as we get closer to it, I'll need to contact like Aniruddha Prabhu and I'm not sure who's in charge of ISKCON Brisbane. I'll need to get into contact with all of them about hosting it. But yeah, so you'll just go sit it at your local temples. Yeah, so it'll be in person. You'll sit down, you'll get your paper, and then yeah, if you're somewhere else, the paper will get scanned and sent to me. Otherwise, I'll be there and I'll pick it up and I'm keen to give you all high distinctions. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So pretty straightforward. I'm thinking of just making it an hour long, but I can't remember what the handbook says. I think it says 2 hours, but 2 hours is just too long for such an easy thing. So I'm going to see if I can bend it, but yeah, let's see.
Any questions, Robsy?
Yeah.
How many questions?
How many questions? So I've got like a rough draft ready, but I'm still playing around with it. So I'm not going to commit to the number of questions. Because some questions take longer to answer than others, right? Some question will be like, what does this word mean? And the other one is list beams for vows. You know what I mean? Like they're going to take different times to answer. So I'm gonna do it so that it's possible for you to finish easily within the time limit. These tests are really designed for you to pass. Yeah.
Also, one more. Sorry.
Yeah.
Are we like allowed a cheat sheet, like a 1-pager or something? Or
no cheat sheet. It's so easy. If you had a cheat sheet, you know what I mean? Like because of the format of the questions, a cheat, like yeah. As Purna Chandra Goswami, he often says that devotees are always disappointed by how easy the closed book test is. They wanted something really grueling, but it's not that hard. It's almost, I almost see it as it's just there to make sure you were listening. Like I would recommend for the first one, you all do a little study session just because it's a little nerve-wracking. and you want to make sure you've got all the tiny bits of information down, because some of it is almost like trivia details, if that makes sense. But yeah, don't stress. Stress over your shloka test, please. put the energy into your shlokas, okay? And closed book exam, do a bit of study, but you don't need it's nothing difficult enough that a cheat sheet would even, you know what I mean? A cheat sheet would just make it like an instantaneous 100%. That's how easy it is. You don't need to understand anything to do the test. Somebody theoretically with Google and the questions could pass the test, if you get what I mean, not having attended a single one of these sessions. They would struggle to find some of the answers, but do you get what I mean? You don't need to understand, it's the open book exam where you really need to understand in order to do well. Yeah. So yeah, not to worry. Alex has his questions, so I will get to those.
So sorry, Prabhu,
yeah?
Can I just ask you?
Yeah, for sure.
The shloka exam, would that be written as well? The shloka test?
No. So that'll be in person. I kind of want to do it over Zoom because I just feel like that's easier.
So we have to recite it, is it?
Yeah. I want to do the shloka test on Zoom, to be honest. Like it makes sense to sit down in a room and to do it, so then, you know, just make sure no one's cheating or anything, etc., etc. But with the shloka test, like I don't want to have all of you there sitting for an hour and coming in and taking turns, because I won't make you do it in front of everyone. That's just me, right? So what I'm thinking is I'll just do it over Zoom, and you'll all have your individual times.
Okay.
That's what I'm planning on doing. If I'll talk to Ganesha and Prabhu, if he's got a different idea or a different approach, I might adjust that. But that's how I want to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, to me, it seems unnecessary to have you guys all come to the temple just to recite like 5 minutes of shlokas to me, if that makes sense, right? And then it also becomes difficult because I won't be able to test the devotees in Melbourne and Brisbane and all if they're doing it in person as well, which obviously includes yourself, right? So, so I'm thinking of just doing the shloka test on Zoom, but you have to have your video on for the shloka test.
Yeah.
Eyes very, very closed. You have to put your hand over your eyes because it's really easy to pretend your eyes are closed and still have the shlokas in front of you. Like my eyes look closed right now, but they're actually open. So you have to put your hand over your eyes. That's the one rule. So yeah, but we'll do it on Zoom. We'll do the shloka test on Zoom.
Okay.
Seems like you're giving tips, Prabhu.
Yeah, I'm giving shits on cheating. I probably didn't come to. Now you guys know how I got 100% on my shloka tests. Now you know the secret's out. Everyone will be doing that. Yeah. So that's why hand over your and no palm cards in your hand either. You'll have to show me your hand. You'll have to show me your hand and then close your eyes. Okay. I'm going to be super strict and no cheating on the shloka test.
Yeah, for the exam, I've actually spoken with Krishna Bhavana Mataji. She's the head pujari, so I've spoken with her. And she said it's fine for me to come to the temple and write the exam. But if you still need to talk to her, that's absolutely fine.
Is she the temple president?
No. Temple president is Janardhan Prabhu, but she's the management. So we usually sit with her. Yeah. But that's okay. If you need to speak with Janardhan Prabhu as well, that's absolutely fine. Or if you want me
only reason I need to is I need to send them the papers and get them to print it and all. That's the main reason.
Okay.
I still need to organize a bit more than just the room, if that makes sense.
That's fine.
I can't give you the file to I can't give you the exam to print out, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Understand, Prabhu. Yeah, thank you.
Jai. Okay, yeah. No, everyone gets stressed. After you have this closed book exam, you'll never be stressed for any of the other ones. It's always scary because you just haven't done it before. I totally get it. I was scared for my first one. And then I finished it with like an hour left to go. And I was like, this is, you know, then, yeah. And you guys will have a similar experience. That's why I'm thinking of doing a shorter time one, because it's just annoying to sit down there for an hour. Okay. So to come to Alex's question. So this is a good question. Does this include internal and environmental factors? Both yes and no. So this is related actually to Sri's question, because Sri was talking about the Paramatma, right? Once somebody becomes a devotee, you're not really in the Paramatma's sort of jurisdiction that much anymore. The Paramatma is there and acts as a Chaitya Guru, but it's more Krishna acting directly, right? And so there's two aspects to it. For the pure devotee on the highest platform, there's no question of karma at all. And all of it is just Krishna's desire of what happens, right? So some of these things might still happen. It's not that your life becomes easy, but they all are directly Krishna's pastime, right? You're on the highest level, the devotee's life becomes a pastime of Krishna, right? So that's why we talk about Prabhupada had the pastime of getting sick, right? It's because Prabhupada's not getting sick in the sense that we get sick because it's a karmic reaction. Prabhupada's getting sick because it's part of the pastime, right? But on lower levels, it's said Krishna preserves certain amounts of karma to help the devotee, both to help the devotee preach in the material world and also to help them grow more in their Krishna consciousness. So most of the other karma gets destroyed, but some of the manifest karma stays.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, and we discussed this more in Nectar of Devotion. So when we study Nectar of Devotion, there's a whole analysis of the different types of karma, and the whole mechanism, how is karma caused, the whole cause and effect, the different varieties. Like it's a whole diving into it, and how does bhakti affect the different types of karma and stuff like that. Yeah, so in Nectar of Devotion, we'll go really, really in depth on this sort of stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good.
I think Baladevi Vibhushan actually says that when that karma gets removed, it gets put onto the people close to you, or something like that. So he says something like that. I can't remember exactly what he means, but yeah, but fun. And the Buddhi Yoga equals Buddhism equals Vivek karma. Was that a question, or was that more of a bit of banter?
That was just banter.
Okay, that was banter. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Let's just make sure. Okay, are there any more questions? Okay, well, with all that, I'll see you all next week again. So the homework is read the first 9 texts of chapter 6 and compare them to the description of like Ashtanga yoga and all in chapter 5. Just so you can see how chapter 5 is sort of referring to it. I think it's an interesting activity. Yeah. Okay. So let's finish up on that. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindubhya cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Shri Bhagavad-gītā ki jai. Anantakoti Vaishnavin ki jai. Hare Krishna.